To me, it's like, how is an experience with one individual Black person, how does that become your experience with all Black people? But I mean,
Segregation and stuff like that.
like you talked about double consciousness a way earlier, where it's like you're dating a Black person from the perspective of like a white person in a sense.
That is what's happening with Black men today. Black men, Gen X, millennial, and Gen Z Black men. They are dating double consciously. How are you, Gen Z, and bad with technology, dog?
You're asking a really good question. I don't know. Like, I'm just like, I feel like in some ways, like, I'm decent at editing. Like, I know a little bit about, the video production and like audio production stuff. But then at like the same time, like, I'm also not great with technology. So I have no clue. It's like either I really know what I'm talking about or I just really don't.
And you're studying like law, right? Or political science?
Political science, yeah.
Okay, so you are a right-brained type of person, would you say?
What's the right brain? What's the right brain? Which one is
That's
creative and
like
which one is
language, arts, and creativity is right brain, and then left brain is sort of like analysis and math and all that stuff.
Weirdly enough, I feel like when I was younger, I'd probably tell you left brain, but I think that was because my parents, one of my parents is Cameroonian and the other is Haitian. So I feel like I was almost like coerced into believing that I was left brained and that I was amazing at math and like, and I was going to be a doctor. So I would have told you like the programming in me would have told you left brain. But I actually think that I'm more right brain as I got older. I'm like, I don't like math and I don't like science. So yeah.
Well, that could be a thing of how it's taught in the US, but for me, my sort of like natural, I guess, academic and then in some ways personal affinity has leaned more towards like verbal communication, performing
Mm-hmm.
arts and creation and stuff like that. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Well, let's
Alrighty.
light this candle.
Right. Let's get it started. So we are talking a little bit about gender wars and things of that nature. But I actually kind of want to start this off. I watched a video earlier today. I would probably do some type of reaction to it on TikTok. And I think it was Sneeko. I don't know if you're familiar with him. One of those crazy red pill streamers, but he said something that was interesting to me where he was talking about like a woman's value, and that like, it your how you value yourself has to match up with how the world may value you. And I was thinking, like, if a lot of men are thinking like that, then is there like a self-worth issue within men in general? Because like, at least for me, I always believe like, okay, people can have their thoughts and opinions about you, but you don't have to agree with them. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, if there's a ton of men who believe that like, okay, everything that others think of me is me, then there has to be that issue there. At least it has to be present.
That is an interesting question. And I, am a cisgender man. So that's certainly something that we'll unpack. But you ain't even do no intros, homie.
Oh yeah, you're right. Before we get into it, before Korey answers, I'm sorry, I got caught up in it. Welcome to the Safe Space Podcast. I'm your host, Sydney Rosans, and this is my first recurring guest, and he's gonna be back. Trust me, he's gonna be
I'm the
back.
first recurring?
Yes, you're the first recurring guest.
Oh,
Like, my brother
that
doesn't really
means
count because I live with him, but like, you definitely count as the first recurring guest. So
your brother don't. And it's your brother. Your brother counts. I'm the second recurring.
he's pretty much like a host at this point. He's recurred too
Gotcha.
often
Gotcha.
for him to be a
Okay.
guest. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, like
So
whatever.
he's like
Here's Spencer
a
again.
panelist or a guest host.
Yes, 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 yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. But so welcome again, Korey.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you
Of
so
course,
like this is your
anytime.
platform. You don't have to have me. So thank you very much.
Anytime. You're extremely insightful, and I think that you are exactly what I want my audience to receive. And since you've been on the podcast, like my YouTube has kind of done really well, so more people are gonna hear you. I have like I was at like 100 something.
Thinking of reviving it, but
We're at like 460, 470 now. So I mean, more people are gonna hear you, and I feel like more people need to hear
I hear
you.
that a check being cut is coming. Is that what I'm hearing?
A check? Whoa! I'm not even getting a check yet. I'm still doing this for free. You can write me like, I can write you like a little IOU or something like later on.
Nah, I'll tell you. Like I said, I have a podcast. It's dormant. I haven't used it in a while. Obviously, I've been busy with like running for election and stuff like that. But since I've met so many cool people on TikTok, I'm thinking of reviving it. But honestly, you know what? I'll tell you. I'll tell you what I want to tell you at near the end of the program.
Okay.
But
Okay.
no IOU necessary for now.
Alrighty. For now.
It's a labor of love. I really feel like what you and I and a lot of creators on TikTok do, I call us the Tik talkers, you know what I'm saying? As opposed to like the brand girlies or the dance folks or whatever. Like we are issues focused and not necessarily fully entertainment focused, other than entertainment aspect. Infotainment, you know? Who needs Adam Conover when you got Sydney Rosant?
Right. Tell him, Korey. Tell him.
We need more black infotainment people in the space.
We do. The world values you is
Your first question for me.
I watched this TikTok clip earlier today. It was from a streamer. His name is Nico. He's one of those red pill types. And so he was having a conversation with a woman, and he was talking about how people's value is determined by what the world thinks of them. And that, you know how they use like those buzzwords like, oh, you're delusional if you think that, like, you have value. It's the world that determines your value. And so after watching that, I was like, okay, if there's a large group of men who believe that the world is what determines their value, then like it's clear that there's some type of self-worth, self-acceptance issue going on with men, because like for me personally, like I cannot allow the world to determine my value. Otherwise, I'm going to think so little of myself. And so it's like for men, particularly, like I think particularly black men who are thinking this way, like, is this a potential source of the gender wars that we're seeing?
It's definitely a factor. And so if we're talking about the world or the quote unquote marketplace determining someone's value, then that is definitely, since capitalism is one of the offspring of white supremacy, some internalized white supremacy, right? Like, imagine if our ancestors were the Key and Peele skit about the auction block, where all these other slaves are being purchased, right? All these other enslaved people are being purchased, but they're not. And they're just like, why am I not being picked? Why am I not being picked, right? You are internalizing white supremacy, and you are allowing white supremacy to tell you how your value is determined, right? You and me, I won't speak for you. I have had to learn, and I was really little because I was a dark skinned, overweight black boy. Like, I got picked on a lot. But I've never really let that stuff get to me because I was very sort of like securely attached to my parents. I had a loving community that uplifted me. So like if I got into school or like after school activities, and somebody said something mean to me, I might go tell a teacher or whatever, but it wasn't like I didn't go home and cry at night over it.
Yeah.
And so the idea that someone's value in society is inherently dependent upon the perspectives of others that's white supremacy, baby.
Yep.
And that's sort of the real driver of some of these gender wars. But to answer your question about is it a factor about like a self-esteem issue? Uh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad to have this space because there are socio-political and socio-economic drivers of the gender wars in the Black community and why we're seeing increasing radicalization, not only anymore of most Black, but young Black men as well.
And you were talking about like your upbringing and how you came from like, you know, a loving, caring family and
I mean,
not really being super disturbed at like the jokes and things of that nature. And I can kind of relate in a much different sense. But I grew up in San Francisco and I went to Catholic school out there. And so my mom's a nurse and she worked at night. My dad's a chef, but I was going to school with kids whose parents were 7-figure earners, 8-figure earners. And so like not only was I the only Black person like in the school pretty much, but like I was the only person who was like middle class at the school. And so, you know, I remember like people would make little digs, little comments. I mean, there were some teachers that just didn't like me because they didn't believe I belonged there. And
what were the
like,
race or the ethnicities of the teachers?
oh, it was all white. It was all white. There was one. Actually, no. I think there was one. There was one Spanish teacher. She was Latina, but she never showed up. One day I'll talk about that school on this podcast because it was so much going on. Like I can't believe my parents paid.
Lining and all these other things that have.
But like there were definitely teachers who like alienated me, or there would be just a lot, almost like I was being like bullied by the people who were supposed to educate me, but I would never let that define me. You know what I'm saying? Like at the end of the day, like I'm
Right.
here because I'm supposed to be here. So it's like I'm here to
Right.
learn, and it's like I'm not going to allow what you all think to mess with my head or make me feel small or any of that stuff. And so it's just like I don't understand how someone can say that okay, the world determines your value and that they are a functioning human being, like especially if you're not white and a man, like how a cis straight man, how can you exist like that? I personally just don't understand it because I feel like you would just never you would never see worth in yourself. You would never see value in yourself if you're, especially if you're part of a marginalized group.
Yeah. So obviously there is the phrase that was coined, I forget by whom. I'm sure that we'll get it in the show notes, but post-traumatic slave syndrome of like the people have been oppressed for so long. Even if you want to go back to W.B. Du Bois's, it wasn't it's not double vision. Well, maybe it was double.
I
Let
know
me
what
look
you're
this
talking
up.
about. I know exactly what you're talking about, but I just cannot remember. Hold
Yeah,
on.
let me pull it up. W.B.
Double
Du
consciousness. That's what you're
Bois.
talking about, right? Is it double
Yes,
consciousness? Okay.
it is double consciousness. Um, and in Du Bois's text about double consciousness in The Souls of Black Folk, he said, well, listen, Black people exist in a way where we have been conditioned to view ourselves through our oppressor's eyes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what W.B. Du Bois basically wrote in The Souls of Black Folks. And so all this stuff that we're discussing, all the anger, all the outrage, all the hurt that young Black men in particular are feeling right now is because they are experiencing a double consciousness moment, but they're allowing white supremacy to win.
Mm-hmm.
They have opted to allow Kevin Samuels to tell them that it is the marketplace, a capitalistic term, and son of white supremacy to say, this is how value is defined.
Mm-hmm.
That there can be uh, limits or even definitions on individual and group value and human dignity based on how others perceive you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is incorrect. That
Mm-hmm.
simply is false. Um, if you buy into that, um, it's internalized reality.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue is that for a lot of these young men, um, they are allowing the pain of that reality to spill over into acts of violence that then become everybody else's problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Malcolm X said, what about like somebody asked him something about a racist or something. He said, listen, if if you want to kill me because
Mm-hmm.
I'm black, that's your problem.
Mm-hmm.
If you have the power to kill me because I'm black, that's my problem. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I say that they are making it everyone else's problem, because Red Fox is Detroit Red violence. And so, can you hear me?
I Yeah, I can hear you. I have a question for you actually. Do you are you good?
Yeah, I just need to make sure that I heard a thing, and I need to make sure that my
Okay,
earbuds are
okay.
still connected.
Okay, good. So
What's
I
your
have
question? Yeah.
do you remember when Oluwatoyin, her last name is Salau, I think. Do you remember when she died during the Black Lives Matter protest? I think it
Come on
was
now.
in
She
like,
didn't die. She was
well, not die.
murdered. She was
I'm sorry.
kidnapped and
She was
murdered
murdered. But you do you
by an
remember
older
like
black man.
but do you
Yeah.
remember the thing with I mean you're pretty tapped in, so I'm sure you do. But the whole thing with like No Name and like J. Cole and like his freestyle that he made because he felt like No Name had subbed him or something on Twitter right after she was murdered, and he was basically saying like, oh, black women need to teach black men and like all kinds of different stuff. It was just very like insensitive. Do you recall
So
that moment?
let me tell you, because I go through this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm tapped into like news, world, and current events. If it's pop culture, I
Okay,
typically don't have a reference for it.
so
I
I'll
vaguely
explain.
remember. Well, no, because I still have something to respond to it. I vaguely
Okay.
remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, right. But if you look at that's actually a great example of the current dynamic that is also driving like these gender wars.
Mm-hmm.
Let me say this: the scope of the gender wars is very small.
Mm-hmm.
The scope of the gender wars is very, very small. It is highly visible because we live in a social media age. Um, and because there are so many silos and echo chambers on digital platforms, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, the people who are engaged in these discussions tend to sort of like be pushed
Mm-hmm.
because it is easier to engage with negative content than it is to engage with sort of like positive or uplifting content. So
Mm-hmm.
when people talk about, and people have said this historically forever, like there's like the news only tells you bad things.
Mm-hmm.
That is an accurate statement
Mm-hmm.
because if the news did the opposite, right? And there
Mm-hmm.
obviously is some discussion to be had about finding an equilibrium. But if
Mm-hmm.
the news only presented things that society generally agrees are positive, that information would not necessarily be as useful, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it, you need to know if the weather is bad or not.
Yeah.
You need to know if your politicians are corrupt or not. And
Mm-hmm.
so, on presenting these things, like, yes, the issue it can be described as negative,
Mm-hmm.
um, but without that information, you would go through life lacking a key piece that that is important.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these platforms are not news organizations, and news organizations are not what they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so when we get on these platforms and we get in these echo chambers and these silos, it's going to amplify people's perspective on things.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is what is. And so if we're talking about from the American experience today is that people have lost perspective. And so then for Gen Z, and I'll get on millennial black men a bit in a moment, but for Gen Z specifically, and also Gen Alpha, because my niece is Gen Alpha, and she, she's coming into her adolescence.
Okay.
She has access to Snapchat and TikTok and Twitter and all these things. She was born into the world with that. Gen Z was born into the social media age. Millennials, we weren't born into a world where we're constantly tapped into the internet. We were not born into a world where so much social capital was driven by Instagram and Snapchat. Um, and so I think it is likely understudied the negative effects that growing up never really let that stuff, technology that is reiterating these messages, have had over time.
Okay. Yeah. I have a question since we were talking about the different generations because obviously like the whole passport bros thing and we will have like a discussion about that too. That is sort of becoming a phenomenon and like before whenever I would sort of like psychoanalyze
You in society.
okay, it's younger guys who are getting trapped into this nonsense. It's the Gen Z and
And then
everything.
the
And
passport
then I'm
bros
like,
upended your
hold.
picture of that.
I was like, hold on. I was like, wait, wait a
Mm-hmm.
moment. And so now, I mean, the thing about social media that I think is also interesting is that it can sometimes be like an amplifier. So I'm wondering, like, these conversations that we're hearing right now, have they been going on for a lot longer than any of us may have realized, and we're just now
No,
hearing it?
no, that's the thing that I keep trying to tell drivers of and folks that are younger than me on the internet. I'll tell anyone who wants to listen the way that we are experiencing the gender wars, because you can argue that in the black community, right? Like um, since the enslavement of West Africans, the triangular trade, the Middle Passage, uh, up to liberation, et cetera, right? When black women sort of describe black men historically as like being oppressive or benefiting from patriarchy, like that may be true. It may be true that black men reaped the benefits of patriarchy early in our sort of like careers, right? Because after the Civil War, you get the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. 13th Amendment, nobody can be like I think enslaved unless they commit a crime. 14th Amendment defines sort of like citizenship, but that's where the Equal Protection Clause is.
Yeah.
And then the 15th Amendment, I believe, is black men's right to vote. And so then I don't know what the 16th, 17th, and 18th Amendment are, but
Yeah.
the 19th Amendment is white women's right to vote. And so in that like 10-year span from 1865 to 1875 or like the early 1880s, that is sort of when a greater socio-political divide likely started. I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to speak authoritatively on that. But from my perspective and what I've learned over time, likely happened between black women and black men. And so if you
To educate me, but
that you have had mm, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 generations of that sort of white supremacist patriarchal society, then you can see how black men have historically used patriarchy to sort of oppress Black women.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, what we're seeing today, the femicide of Black women by Black men today, I have never read anything like it. I have never seen anything like it.
Mm-hmm.
For non-Hispanic Black girls between the ages of 1 to 19, their leading cause of death uh, is homicide.
Mm-hmm.
For non-Hispanic young Black women between the ages of 20 to 44, their fourth leading cause of death is homicide. For Black boys, non-Hispanic Black boys between the ages of 1 and 19, the leading cause of death for them right now is homicide.
Mm-hmm.
And for young Black men between the ages of 20 to 44, the leading cause of death for them is homicide. And so when we're talking about violence, when we're talking about the gender wars and red pilling and the internet and all these things, what you have to remember is that it wasn't it wasn't always intra-community violence at this
Mm-hmm.
level.
Yeah.
But again, we did not get where we are overnight.
Mm-hmm.
So this then becomes the question, and I'm a sort of like tee this one up for you.
Okay.
You got to ask me, how did we get here?
How did we get here?
So after the Reconstruction to the gender wars that we see today, that while a lot of it happens on the internet, it spills over into real life when we see things like that 10-year-old boy in Milwaukee murdering his mom over that headset and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. The way that we got here is that if you come with me back to the early 20th
Mm-hmm.
century, they have opted. 1919 is when white women got the right to vote, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so white women at the time allied themselves with figures like W.B. Du Bois, like Frederick Douglass, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would host them at panels and things like that. And they were sort of working together on the issue of abolition. Well, those alliances stayed intact, right? But when
Mm-hmm.
you get to the suffrage movement, figures like Susan B. Anthony, right?
Mm-hmm.
They did not want Black men to get the right to vote before them, and they did,
Mm-hmm.
and the white feminists threw Black women away,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're getting that further separation of Black men and Black women sociopolitically, even during that time.
Mm-hmm.
So we get abolition, we go through the Reconstruction, we get the right to vote. White women get the right to vote. That's 1919. In the 1920s, well, really after all that, you got Jim Crow.
Mm-hmm.
After all of that, you have Jim Crow. And you have to remember that the through line of because
Mm-hmm.
I'm Black, that's your from enslavement to Jim Crow, and even today, is white people attempting to define and assign value to anyone who is not a white man.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get all of that post traumatic enslavement disorder, post traumatic enslavement ideology. Black men are getting the right to vote. You get all these social changes that sort of happen after the Reconstruction into the early 20th century. And then you have the civil rights movement. After
Mm-hmm.
Jim Crow, you have the civil rights movement. Now, civil rights movement is an interesting time because who are considered to be the leaders of the civil rights movement? Who are the most visible sort of historical figures of the civil rights movement?
MLK, Malcolm X, them two I would consider to be the two
Come on,
most
keep naming.
visible.
Just keep naming names.
John Lewis, Rosa Parks.
Of those four names that you've
Mm,
mentioned, I think you said MLK, Malcolm X, John Lewis, and Rosa Parks. What's the gender ratio?
it's mostly men.
It's mostly
One
men,
woman.
right?
Yeah.
One woman. So, as black men were gaining even more visibility during the civil rights movement, and history is written by the victors, and I'm not saying that black men wrote the history books. In fact, many of the great anthologies on the civil rights movement were written by white men. There are three, I believe, autobiographies about, sorry, not autobiographies, there are three biographies um, about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I think either all three or at least two out of the three were, I
Okay.
typically don't have a reference for it, historians.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you also have people like Fannie Lou Hamer, who's talking about reproductive issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
We completely forget about the legacy of Coretta Scott King because
Mm-hmm.
she outlived her husband.
Yeah.
Coretta Scott King went on to lobby to have his birthday recognized as a holiday. She was very vocal about inclusion of queer and gay rights. We're talking about organizers, Bayard Rustin, a queer black gay man.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, he organized the March on Washington. He organized a lot of the things that sort of King showed up and spoke at. Now, obviously, it was a committee, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't talk about Bayard Rustin. We don't talk about Fannie Lou Hamer. We
Mm-hmm.
don't talk about Coretta Scott King.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that is in part because uh, at that time in American society at all, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody was against queerness,
Yes.
um, and people were still against like women having their rights, their full participation in society. Okay, that all happened. Civil rights. The next articulation of what happens is integration. And
Mm-hmm.
this is where I'm about to land the plane. So if you've if you've bared with me and Sydney this long, because I know Sydney is about to go to sleep after listening to me. If you stuck with me this long, I'm about to land the plane, particularly about the passport bros, um, because the passport bros are Gen X. So if you're looking at the generations, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have the baby boomers, which is 1944 to like 1965, 67,
Mm-hmm.
68, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you have Gen X. Gen X would be from the late 1960s or early 1970s until about 1985, 86.
Okay.
So then you have millennials.
Mm-hmm.
We are from about 1986 to 1996.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Gen Z, which is 97 until about
It's like
2010 or
10.
11.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
to 10 or 11.
Mm-hmm.
So typically, a generation historically has been defined as a span of about 20 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or a generation is defined as um, however long it takes for you to produce offspring, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we know in the black community that you can have aunts and uncles that are older than you and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So after the civil rights movement, we have integration.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to say that integration led to all the woes we're seeing in the black community today.
Yeah.
Integration is often spoken about in the American context as a necessarily like net good for all of American society.
Mm-hmm.
That is not exactly true.
I
It isn't exactly true.
uh-huh. I took a Africana studies course, and I recall this like one lecture where it was like a guest professor, and she kind of like talked about all her specific like critiques of integration and all like the weaknesses in it. And I mean, I found it really interesting because like you said, like we view it from this like very positive viewpoint where it's like this is what the country needed, but as per usual, the people that were hurt were Black people.
Correct. This is what the country needed. Ah, Black people needed to be protected from white people. That's the real
Yes.
tea. Black
Mm-hmm.
people need to be protected from white people and white supremacy, and that has never happened in this country. Let me tell you what happened after integration.
Okay. Okay.
So in 2017, Pew Research, based on data available from the US Census Bureau, compiled a report about intermarriage in the United States. If you have been on my
Oh.
TikTok or if
Mm-hmm.
you have looked at my recent Twitter post, I
Mm-hmm.
have been discussing this report in detail
Mm-hmm.
because it is basically like where the stat that in 2017, as it was being
Mm-hmm.
studied, that Black men intermarry at twice the rate of Black women comes
Mm-hmm.
from.
Mm-hmm.
That comes from that specific report. And I need to get a prop out of my bag real quick.
Ooh.
Okay. And so let's talk about some numbers and what
Okay.
happened after social integration and the Loving decision.
Mm-hmm.
In 1967, which is, I believe, before the Loving decision came to be the law of the land, intermarriage, as it was documented then, was basically like 3% across the board.
Mm-hmm.
Since the Loving decision, there has been um, a sharp increase. Over the last 50 years, there's been a five-fold increase of intermarriage across the board, so that now it sits somewhere between about 15 to 17% across all demographics.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get integration and the Loving decision, and we start talking about Generation X, the Black men of Generation X,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to caveat this. This is just my conjecture, but it
Okay.
is my conjecture based on what I have observed in my society, right? This is how
Mm-hmm.
I conjecture we get to passport bros.
Okay.
Black men went buck wild and started chasing white women as soon as the Loving decision was passed.
Yeah.
That's a hot take, right? That's
That
a scorching hot take.
it's a scorching hot take, but then like also when you consider that like what was the like the coke epidemic happens like probably 10 years later, I can definitely see
The coke? Are you talking about the crack epidemic?
coke, crack, all of the drugs. Were the 80s not during was the 80s not the time period where people were just doing drugs like crazy?
Um, People were doing drugs like crazy in the US from the
Mm,
20s up until, yeah, probably like the 1990s or early 2000s. But what
mm,
you're sort of like describing is what you're describing, again, I keep losing my thoughts because I'm tired, but the war on drugs was started by Richard Nixon, I
mm,
think, in like 1970 or 1969 or 68 or something like that, right?
mm.
So you have the war on drugs that starts sort of like before the 80s. And so
Yeah.
when we're talking about Gen X, you were leading me to my next point.
Okay, okay.
Reagan expands the war on drugs, but
Yes.
Reagan's CIA is also contracting with the Nicaraguan Contras
Mhm.
for like who are, they want to sell them weapons,
Mhm.
but Congress hasn't authorized it. So the CIA starts like moving cocaine and crack all over the U.S. and in the Black community. Yes. But that isn't. We're not there yet.
Okay. I'm sorry. I was pushing this too far forward.
No. You're connecting the dots, right? So this is my conjecture.
Okay.
You have these Gen X men who today would be, at their oldest in their late 50s, and at their youngest would be in their mid to late 40s, right?
Yeah.
Generation X is the first generation in American history to sort of have societal access to the ability to date and marry interracially. And so, and you get sort of from that era, because even today, I don't want to say that there are whispers that Dr. King was attracted to a white woman and that's why he started the civil rights movement. Those two things annoy me because in college, it is documented that Dr. King did have a relationship with a white woman and that it couldn't continue and all that stuff. And then obviously after that, he started working on the civil rights movement and stuff like that.
I feel
But
like
I don't think those
that
things
whole
are.
thing is just people being messy. I think people are just being
That's people being
messy
messy,
and
right?
trying to
It's
just
not causal. Socio-political division.
Obviously he's still going to fight for his rights regardless if he's dating
Thank
a
you.
white woman or not. Like,
Right.
and anywho, I think people are just being messy.
But the other critique of Dr. King that is often levied, I think, pretty justly and duly by Black women is that he was a serial cheater on Coretta. And we can unpack that, but like Dr. King was not planning the civil rights movement and giving all these speeches and doing all these marches and being thrown in jail and beaten by police for some white pussy. Do you know how absurd that sounds? That a man would attempt to change not just his entire society, but the world for some pussy?
That he already got.
That's a wild take. So anyway, these Gen X motherfuckers, they get access to inter dating, intermarrying, right? And so they avail themselves of it to an extent. So intermarriage continues to increase from the time that the Loving decision happens until today. And so if we look at the last 55 years, because Loving, yes, I believe was decided in 67. We are in 2022 now.
Yes.
Like it, I have never seen any. 50 years out of America's like 276-year history is 50 years. That is like 20% of the entire time. This is where the gender wars, to me, are encapsulated and really start.
Okay.
Because when you get to the 1970s, after the Civil Rights Movement, you get the Black Power movement, right? Like after Dr. King and Malcolm X and John Lewis, you get Stokely Carmichael and you get Huey P. Newton and the Panthers, right? That pisses Richard Nixon off. Richard Nixon starts associating progressive white people, the hippies, with marijuana, and then Black people with marijuana. So anytime that there was sort of like solidarity, them niggas was just thrown in jail, right?
Yeah.
We know that Bobby Seale was assassinated, one of the leaders of the Black Panthers and things like that. So you have all this, the counter culture movement of the 60s and 70s. And then after the 60s and 70s, this is truly when capitalism in the United States explodes. It is when Ronald Reagan is elected.
I knew you were going to say that.
And so that is how it is after Ronald Reagan's election. It is after Milton Friedman, the economist we spoke about earlier, and we talked about sort of like Miltonian economics or Friedman economics, and supply chain economics, and people being viewed as consumers, and that the conglomerates can drive like the fiscal and financial markets and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
instead of demand side economics, which is how all economics really should be to function properly.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you're getting the language about market value of individuals. That's when
Mm-hmm.
you're getting sort of like the capitalistic rhetoric about net worth and net income and
Mm-hmm.
all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That takes place in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get to the 90s, bear in mind, the thing you have to keep in mind, 70s and 80s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Millennials and Gen Z are not born yet.
Yeah.
We aren't born yet.
Mm-hmm.
You get to the late 80s and the early 90s, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest scandals of the 1990s was Wesley Snipes giving an interview either to Essence or Ebony magazine. He was dating an Asian woman at the time. And he did not say, like, I don't date black women or I don't fuck with black women. He said, sometimes, what, let me pull this up. Let me pull this interview up
Okay.
because I want to read it exactly. Let's see. Yesterday more. Okay. So here we go. Well, as urban legend goes, 11 years ago, Wesley Snipes told Ebony magazine he hates black women. Oh, if you were older than 5 years old in 1997, which I was five exactly in 97,
Oh
you've
wow.
probably heard some variant of the Wesley Snipes myth. He said he can't stand a black woman because she's always got an attitude, or he said Asian women are better than black women, and he will never go back to black women. Or he said white and Asian women are way more agreeable than black women, and that's why black men turn to other races, and it goes on. Personally, I've heard everything from Wesley Snipes has a clause in his film contracts that keeps him from having black love interests, to Wesley Snipes said black women are fat and greasy.
Oh, he
So
didn't
I
say
get
those
a
things for real. He didn't say those
no,
things.
he didn't say any of those things.
Oh, I was like, whoa.
But these are the myths surrounding this
Okay.
this interview he gave in
Okay.
97.
But what did he say?
Let's get into it.
Okay. 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 Okay.
So I did a simple Google search. Wesley
Okay.
Snipes black women, I typed. The
Mm.
search yielded this, the complete text of Snipes' 1997 interview with Ebony contributor Lynn Normand.
Mm.
Here's what he actually said. The Asian model and restaurateur he introduces as my lady, Donna Wong, has been Snipes' companion for the past year and a half. When asked if he dates black women, he says, primarily all of my life, I've dated black women. Oh, most definitely. Oh my God, mostly. But it just so happens that now I'm dating an Asian woman. It's different, different energy, different spirit, but a nice person. He says he is not ready for marriage, nor is Donna. She's got to learn to deal with the love scenes in the movie first, he says Snipes as he chuckles. Got to get to a place where it's very comfortable. Okay, so the beginning of the interview
Mm. Mm.
is white people giving it a little side eye, but he has not said anything as
Right.
explosive as what people say he said. Okay.
Right.
Wesley says he realizes there are black women who still get an attitude about black men with Asian, white, or Hispanic women. This was in 1997, and like again, we're still having this conversation today. Now,
Mm.
should he have said who get an attitude? Maybe I don't know because again, this is a lot to unpack. Who still
Yeah.
get an attitude about black men with Asian, white, or Hispanic women. I know we've all been hurt and we're all very wounded, he says, addressing
Mm-hmm.
black women. We have to acknowledge that both male and female, we have to acknowledge that both male and female in the black experience. We're a wounded people and we want to possess and we want to own. Again,
Mm.
this is, I'm telling you, this is like this is the distillation of the gender wars. The distillation of this gender wars can go back to this article back in '97. But okay, okay, and we want to possess and we want to own. We don't want to compromise. He said both male and female. We don't want to compromise. We feel like we've compromised enough. But in any relationship, you have to compromise. There's no way around it. And I say to Black women, also brothers, who are very, very successful or who have become somewhat successful, usually it's been at a great expense, unseen by the camera's eye. He goes on to say that Black men, right? Or that, no, I think it's Wesley Snipes specifically. So I'm going to edit here. The article says he, I'm going to use I because I am speaking as Wesley Snipes right now.
Okay.
Now I'm going to read it verbatim. He doesn't want to come home to someone who's going to be mean and aggravating and unkind and who is going to be please me, please me. He doesn't want to come home to that. He doesn't want to come home to have a fight with someone who is supposed to be his helpmate. So it's very natural that he's going to turn someplace that's more compassionate. Okay, so this is the part of the article where it gets right. He kind of the implication.
My thing is, like, I feel like Black people are like the only race of people where, like, he just spoke about like compromise and ownership and all that stuff, right? But for some reason, we're like the only people that makes like a referendum on our entire race after negative experiences dating somebody. It's like, oh, these Black men, this is why I'm leaving. I'm gonna divest. And then when it on the opposite side of the spectrum, it's like, you know what? I just have to go where where they're going to be more peaceful and they're going to be nicer to me. It's like, how is an experience with one individual Black person? How does that become your experience with all Black people? But I mean, it also, like, we talked about double consciousness way earlier, where it's like you're dating a Black person from the perspective of like a white person in a sense.
That is what's happening with Black men today. Black men, Gen X, millennial, and Gen Z Black men. They are dating double consciously. And so let's go back to this article, right?
Yeah.
Because what did Wesley say? And what does the Pew research bear out? The Pew research bears out that the overwhelming majority of racial demographics marry within their own race. What we're also seeing is that after the Loving decision, that intermarriage has increased fivefold, right? So that's basically like a 100% increase or a doubling every decade.
Yeah.
Black women, I think it's, yes, 88% of Black newlywed women, according to the article, marry a Black man as their partner. 76, and this is in 2017. This is 20 years after this article. Black men, Black newlywed men marry Black women at 76%, right?
Yeah.
So for Black women, that's 12% of Black newlywed women who intermarry. But that's 24% of Black men who intermarry. Black newlywed men.
I have another question that I want to ask you. We're still talking about interracial marriage, but for the 24% of Black men who end up marrying outside of their race, they are still in the minority. And so it does frustrate me because they will speak as if they're speaking for all Black men. Like, see, this is why we're leaving you. And it's like, hold on, there's 76% are married to Black women. I don't necessarily know, like, I'll just assume that it's decent enough that they're staying married. But it's just like, how can you? And another statistic is that Black men who marry interracially end up divorced more frequently than Black women who marry interracially.
Particularly if they marry white women.
Exactly, which, let's be real, that's really what they want at the end of the day. The ones who who have
late 1960s.
so it's just like, how can you speak for the majority of your demographic when it's clear that they're not really in agreement with you?
You're in the minority, right? If you are
Mm-hmm.
a black man that goes on the internet and says that black men don't date or are beginning not to date black women because
Mm-hmm.
X, Y, and Z, you speak for 24% of black men.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not an insignificant number. That is um, 1/4. That is 1/4.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for black women, that is closer to you would be speaking for that 12% number. If I'm to fraction this, would represent 1/6,
Mm-hmm.
and so 1/4 is obviously a bigger portion than one
Yeah.
sixth of something.
Yeah.
Um, so let's go back to the article.
Mm-hmm. Where were we at? Oh, he doesn't want to come
uh,
home to somebody unkind, mean, unkind, whatever,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah. But
More
really, where we
compassionate.
are is right. So it's very natural that he's going to turn to some place that's more compassionate. This
Mm-hmm.
was in 1997.
Mm-hmm.
Black men did not have legal access to date. Nobody except certain white people had
Mm-hmm.
access to interracial dating and intermarriage
Mm-hmm.
30 years before this article. So when I'm telling you that these gender wars that we're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing is a new phenomenon,
Mm-hmm.
it's like really a 30 or 40-year-old phenomenon. But okay, you've worked hard and you deserve to come home to comforting. And usually a man who has that will appreciate it. Because I've never known one cat, all those cats I've hung out with and still hang out with, who found something that they really, really, really like and didn't go back to it. They all go back. It's very simple. But now think about it. He's talking about black women here, right? He's
Yeah.
saying that a black man that is happy in his relationship, in his marriage, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
they're not going to, date outside of their race.
Yeah.
And before that, he also says, like, I overwhelmingly have dated black women,
Mm-hmm.
right? Didn't find the one that was right for me. I'm dating an Asian woman now. This is like the first time that he, like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Mm-hmm.
he Wesley Snipes was not out here not dating black women and
Mm-hmm.
not building up a whole lot of resentment and stuff when he's like talking about this article.
Yeah.
So his words in this article from this was 97, so this was 25 years ago, almost 30 years ago, is like,
Mm-hmm.
no, I've overwhelmingly dated black women. If people are happy in their relationship, if a man is happy in his relationship, he's not going to leave. Okay.
Yeah.
When asked for clarification, Snipes emphasizes that he is not saying that a black woman cannot be the type of woman a man wants to come home to.
Mm-hmm.
Not at all, he declares. Absolutely not. That's the point. I want
Mm-hmm.
to come home and I don't want to argue. I want to be pleasing, but if I ask you to get me a glass of water, you're going to say, "Dim days is over." Please, come on, Wesley says. And again, this is where it gets problematic again. A
Okay.
man likes that. I don't know why. It's been that way forever. It makes him proud. Like when the guys come over and your lady comes out with a tray of food and says, "I made this up for you." And the guys
Mm-hmm.
are like, well, bear in mind that Wesley Snipes is, I believe he is a baby boomer. So like,
Okay. Yeah.
and this article is
Yeah.
is 25 years old
Mm-hmm.
with a tray of food and says, "I made this up for you." And the guy's like, "Oh man, you've got a great woman." And the man says, "Yeah, I do." A man will appreciate it when you're kind and when you're nice. Again, very loaded here, right? It's such a weird dichotomy of like, I've dated black women all my life. I'm dating an Asian woman for like the first time. Um, I'm in Hollywood now, but y'all don't know how I came up. Y'all didn't see the off-camera struggles. And as a man, yes, I would like to come home to XYZ, right? As an
Mm-hmm.
individual, well, I mean, I guess he is speaking for all men in this scenario, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But he is a baby boomer, and this article is almost 30 years old.
Yeah. I'm not gonna
Okay.
lie, Korey. Wesley has me confused because, like, he has me because he's kind of like all over the place because he's saying like at the end of the day a man is gonna want someone who's nice, blah blah blah. But you've only dated black women, so you keep going back, except for this. I mean, the first thing that popped into my
Implication, man.
I'm gonna assume that black women have been kind and nice to you because you're saying that you don't want to be around anyone who's aggravating or mean.
So what he doesn't say is why those relationships didn't work out, right? He doesn't get into the
Exactly.
nitty-gritty of that.
Mm-hmm.
And even as he's been dating this Asian woman for 1 year, I don't think Wesley married her. I don't even know if Wesley Snipes is married, but let's look that up real quick.
Yeah, let's.
Wesley Snipes is 60 years old. He was born in Orlando, Florida. He was married to someone named April Dubois from
Mm-hmm.
1985 to 1990, which
Mm-hmm.
is 7 years before this article came out. If you click April Dubois, like if you Google it and look at his information panel and click April Dubois,
Mm-hmm.
this girl is blackity black. The images that you see
Very.
of them. But then in 2003, and I don't remember when Wesley Snipes got out of jail, he has married a,
Nakyung
a,
Park.
a Korean woman,
Mm-hmm.
Nakyung Park, and they have been together for 19 years.
Mm.
So he did end up marrying an Asian woman, but
Mm-hmm.
he did also marry a black woman. And again, this is like
But this is the part, and the thing is, like, whenever celebrities talk about anything, like, he's not going to talk about his behavior in relationships, and he's not going to talk about the nuances and all of those things. He's just going to say, in general, I want someone who's going to be nice to me and whatever. But it's also like, I can't. And I think this is one of the other issues with the gender wars is people keep talking about celebrities. It's like you can't really draw any conclusions about Wesley Snipes' experiences with black women from what he said, other than it must have been relatively pleasant. You married one for 7 years, not 7 years, for 5 years.
yeah.
So like,
And I need to get a prop out of my bag.
I'm sure there's black women who are like, he hates black women. He has to. And then I'm sure there's some black men being like, yup, they're just not nice to us. Them girls are so mean and angry and bitter. My oh my. But it's just like you can't draw any conclude. I just feel like when it comes to like celebrity interviews, anytime people bring up celebrities or the one percenters, I'm like, you don't know anything about them. We cannot use them as evidence of anything.
If you're getting your ethical and moral code from celebrities, your ethical and moral code, your ethical and moral compass
Mm-hmm.
is never going to point true north. It's going to be fucked up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so when I talk about Gen Z and Gen Alpha
Mm-hmm.
growing up with access to the internet and
Mm-hmm.
how celebrity culture has exploded in America in the
Mm-hmm.
internet age,
Mm-hmm.
like that is what we are seeing.
Mm-hmm.
We are seeing people who are getting their moral and ethical codes from the internet
Mm-hmm. This is
as
a clip.
opposed
I'm clipping
to
this.
as opposed to um, sort of like sense community
Mm.
as opposed to like philosophy, history, the humanities,
Mm-hmm.
and books, right?
Mm-hmm.
And books. Because if you notice, one of the main things that I advocate on my Twitter, on my TikTok,
Mm-hmm.
is y'all need to go read. So, my uncle Aaron, when I was about 13, I spent the summer with him. Fold increase of intermarriage, talking about his experience as an artist. He was an engineer before he became a painter. He had been painting all of his life and stuff. Went to Tuskegee Institute before it was Tuskegee University,
Mm-hmm.
and so he worked, I believe, for Procter and Gamble. He was a pretty high powered guy there, like a good engineer. Had an
Mm-hmm.
expense account. They paid for his travel and stuff like that.
Oh wow.
But he decided to follow his passions after his sons, Omari and Onaje, went to college and were out of the house and whatever. He and his wife must have discussed it. Him and my aunt Byrne must have discussed it, and been like, okay, Aaron, now you can paint, right? My uncle has made a living as a painter all of my life. So that's 30 years. And if he was doing it before I was born, it could be as long as 40.
Yeah.
And so he talked about going on the artist circuit and meeting different artists who had their MFAs in visual arts and PhDs, and they would complain about why their work isn't selling. He was the first person that introduced me to the concept of art for art's sake, art pour la art, which is like a French concept, which is like, why should we create art? And it's a very white concept, right? Black art often has very specific messages or is expressing very specific feelings and emotions, which is why Black art is some of the most captivating art that you can ever find. I'll keep it a buck. Like when I look at a lot of white people's art, it doesn't move me. And if we're being honest, it doesn't move them either, right? Like there's a reason why people are like, with modern art specifically, like I could have done that, right? Like so the difference between Andy Warhol and Basquiat are huge, right?
Yeah.
And so my uncle was saying he was having these conversations, and these people couldn't figure out like why their art wasn't selling or why his art was selling. He said, Corey, I tried to have conversations with these people who have gone to school for art. I didn't. I went to school for engineering, and he said, I can't have no conversations with them, man, because they don't know anything. And he said, he said they don't know anything. He said, and this has stuck with me for 17 years. He said, Korey, they're weak. They don't read.
Oof.
He said they are weak because they don't read. And so if all the information or the majority of the information that you are getting is from celebrities or is from the internet, and you don't fact check, right? If you refuse to try to put anything into context by getting information regarding history, sociology, all of that stuff, you are intellectually weak and can be easily led astray by the most easily debunkable misinformation that is put out by people with specific agendas, right? And so what we are seeing in America is misinformation and disinformation driving our politics, leading to more instances of violence. And so for these young Black men grew up in the internet, who grew up with the internet, who may have been raised in part by the internet, I can tell by my interactions online, whether it's about Kanye and Kyrie, when I spoke out against what they did, or when I tried to contextualize why what they did is wrong, when I talked about Takeoff's death and the epidemic of gun violence that is happening in the Black community today, when I give people the stats about intimate partner violence in the Black community and its patriarchal roots, when I ask people to read Bell Hooks's, Black men specifically, read Bell Hooks's The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity, and Love. It came out in 2004. They reject it. They reject engaging with these books. And they never, have you ever seen a Hotep or a Black Hebrew Israelite or just a Black patriarchal man ever have any sort of evidence to contextualize or support their thesis?
Korey, I'm about to tell you something. Korey. Because I'm starting to take my content in a different direction where I do a lot more reactionary stuff, right? So I reacted to, do you know the Daily Wrap Up crew? They're one of those, they're big on TikTok. Okay. Well, that's how you know you're on the right side of TikTok then. So basically, they were saying that, like, Black men have it the hardest, whatever, disagreeing with what Malcolm X said about Black women being the most disrespected group of people in America, essentially, right? And so I did a reaction video, and they commented, and I was like, I'll come on your show and we can have a conversation. Radio silence. They don't want to hear opposing views that they know will trump theirs, because they have Black women on their show all the time. And I don't want to be, sound disrespectful, but like the Black women on their show are suffering from exactly what your uncle was telling you, that they themselves don't read. So they can't respond with any empirical evidence,
American history, to
the microphone pretty much, and then essentially prove them right that Black women are just, aggressive and whatever and whatever. I'm like, I'll come on your show and I'll talk to you and have a conversation, and we can try and make this productive, because that's what I'm all about. I'm like, let's try and have a productive conversation. No, radio silence every time.
Not only that, I don't know if you are familiar with the personality of Moses the prophet era, because even Black dreadlocked dude who is apparently like a teacher or was a teacher in some school system, he's
Oh
basically a
Lord.
pedophile. Where he has said things, because I don't want to get sued. He has said things that align with predation on young women. Okay.
Oh
I
Lord.
went live with him last year, back in like December or something. I still have the video. I can
Okay.
show it to you. I can do all this stuff.
Oh
The
God.
tactic that people who have no empirical evidence to back up what they say
Mm-hmm.
is to shout you down. They
Mm-hmm.
will not allow you to get a word in edgewise, and then they present your inability to respond as
Mm-hmm.
you not having information. But the
Mm-hmm.
fact is, is like that Dr. Umar quote, like, I'm not going to have an argument with you. You don't have my
Mm-hmm.
credentials. You don't have my experience. You don't have my
Mm-hmm.
expertise. I
Mm-hmm.
don't need to raise my voice to get
Mm-hmm.
my point across.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to resort to theatrics. Everything that I say when I discuss it will be contextualized or rooted in some sort of evidence. And the other tactic they use, beyond just straight up shouting you down, is if
Mm-hmm.
you are a Black person, they will say, well, who wrote it? Is it a white
Mm-hmm.
person? And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
even if a Black person did the study, the outcome wouldn't change. Maybe some of the
Exactly.
context would. I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
lie. Maybe some of the context would, but the conclusions of the study wouldn't change. So if you refuse to engage with facts, data, article, books
Mm-hmm.
about like Blackness in the United States of America, but
Mm-hmm.
you're speaking on these issues, you're saying nothing. You are a false prophet.
And I think the other thing, like you were saying, that you're not going to, you know, argue, yell, scream, like you have your evidence, is that the times where maybe you don't know, you have enough integrity to not pretend like you know. Because
Oh
I'm
yes.
sorry, I think that like the majority of these red pill whatevers, they're all liars to me. They're all pathological liars, in my opinion, who make stuff up. Who make
Well,
stuff up.
Kanye said slavery was a choice, right? Slavery is a choice. That is a lie.
Exactly. Oh, Harriet Tubman didn't actually free the slaves.
That is a lie.
Like, they are liars. And then there's people who watch them. But like you said, I mean, if you don't, I mean, it's funny, like what your uncle said is really similar to what my dad would always preach to me, which is knowledge is power. So it's like,
Yeah.
if you don't do any research on your own, if you are intellectually lazy, you're very easily manipulated. And I'm watching people be manipulated by pathological liars who have no idea what they're saying. They're just saying whatever they know will get them attention. And I try to emphasize that in my videos. I'm like, these people are lying to you. They don't know what they're talking about.
So that's the third thing that an internet snake oil salesman will say, right? They'll
Mm-hmm.
say, they will say that the person with the evidence is lying, right? Trump said that the election was stolen. That is a lie. There is no evidence to support that. Alex Jones said that Sandy Hook was a false flag. He is in the hole for billions of dollars now. And we're at a point now where people on Twitter, and again, right, Black people are not the face of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is also an offspring of white supremacy. And so I've tried to tell Black people who are engaged in anti-Semitic praxis that, like, hey, you are being an agent of white supremacy right now. But they think because the issue of anti-Semitism does not directly negatively affect it's 50 majority of Black people that, like, all Jews are white, that there is no intersection of Jewish identity and Black identity, that they're willing to throw the Jews under the bus because they feel slighted by the Jews. These niggas don't know any Jews.
Right.
They don't know Jewish history. Everything that they know about the Jews either comes from the Christian text, the Bible, which was heavily edited by the council that made it under King James in England, or it's the pernicious myths surrounding Jews and banking that have been around since the 16th century. And Christian Divine on TikTok has excellent breakdowns of where these myths originate. He has excellent breakdowns of why they persist. But on Twitter, what's today? Today is Monday.
Yeah.
On Twitter, Friday, Saturday, Sunday of this week, or of last week.
Are we talking about Kanye saying that Hitler was not a terrible person, or that he did some good? Are we talking about that?
I'm not talking about Kanye. Like, I understand that Kanye sparked that, but the number of Black men in particular, but also Black women that I had interactions with, they're just like, well, Hitler didn't have an issue with the real Jews, right? Because the real Jews are supposedly us, right?
This is what
Hitler had an issue
me.
with these fake Jews, and it's like, bro, we are at a point where people are so disconnected from reality and history and context that Black people, Hitler would not shake Jesse Owens's hand when he destroyed them Aryan motherfuckers in the 1936 Olympics.
But also, additionally, did Hitler not draw inspiration from how he witnessed America oppress Black people, for how he would then commit genocide against Jewish people? Is that not? I really I think that he did draw inspiration from America.
So that is 500% correct. So,
and so I'm just
the Nazis, the Nazis were inspired by the U.S. And actually, there's a very poignant connection between Hitler and the United States, because Henry Ford, the founder of Ford Motor Company, the designer of the assembly line, a very wealthy man, funded the Nazi Party.
Big surprise. But like, this is, but my thing is like, because I was ranting on the phone with my friend about this. I'm just like, for Black people to believe that, oh yeah, no, Hitler actually, from what I remember, Hitler actually rocks with us. Huh?
My grandfather, my maternal grandfather, fought in segregated ranks in World War II. He went overseas and he fought.
Oh, wow.
So when I see that shit, I take it very personally. And beyond that, if I can circle back to the Henry Ford thing, the United States government on several occasions asked Henry Ford to stop funding the Nazi Party. Asked him a bunch of times, and he didn't. And then the war started. And when the war started, we started getting, like, we had film, right? Like, movies were a thing.
Yeah.
Television was sort of nascent. But most of the reports came through on radio.
Yeah.
But what we have archival footage of is when the Allied forces, when American troops, Russian troops, British troops, French troops, when the Allied forces started liberating the concentration camps, you can go see, you could go on YouTube and look this up. You can see the piles of unalived bodies, emaciated because they were starving these people who they enslaved. When the US got that footage, they showed it to Henry Ford. They showed Henry Ford. Again, black people are not the face of anti-Semitism. Henry Ford didn't like the Jews. Henry Ford also didn't like Negroes. They showed it to Henry Ford. Henry Ford saw what he had done, and he died of a heart attack on the spot.
Wow.
Now, I will not blame a lot of American people for not knowing a lot of this information because they don't teach it in school.
Yeah.
What they teach in school is propaganda, right? That's why we have this pushback from the Republican Party about critical race theory, which is not taught in K through 12 schools and typically not even taught at the collegiate level. A lot of people say that CRT.
I thought critical race theory was taught in was taught in like law schools. I like
that is so that, I was about to get to that. That is not the entire story about critical race theory.
Okay.
Critical race theory is a tool that, yes, it may be predominantly taught in law schools, but there are obviously applications of it that can touch sociology, psychology, history. There are many more applications, but people are usually not exposed to what critical race theory actually is until they are in undergraduate or higher level education.
Okay.
So what Ron DeSantis, what Donald Trump, Mitch McConnell, what all these Republicans are against, all these local school boards, these white people are against, they are against the de-propagandization of American history.
For sure.
That is what they are fighting against. They do not want their children, and by extension, anybody else's children, to be told the real history in context of how white people have, and I'll just keep it in the United States context, have ravaged the United States of America. And so I understand that a lot of this stuff is not only in the history texts that you get in school, but I'll tell you where it is. It's at your local library. It's on the internet. It is in discussions by people like you and me and Sunny Day Jones and Christina Brown, that brown girl. There are people who have gotten access and are trying to show exactly, let's see, that you can be saved from these colonial constructs, from these white supremacist constructs. But if you are unwilling to engage, with, again, with facts, with research, with books and articles, you will be lost forever.
It's
And
funny.
I don't want to see that for my people. I don't want to see that for my people.
Agreed. Following me back then, this was like not way back, it was during the summer, but I had made a post and I said that like I don't desire for my partner to be my provider, right? Like you don't have to be my leader, you don't have to know how to do all those things, you don't have to make hundreds of thousands of dollars, like just be a good partner, but like you don't have to be like this leader figure. And boy, they were eating me alive, telling me that telling me I was never going to find anyone, all of these things. And I'm like, I'm doing y'all a favor, because the
Right.
pressure the pressure to be like this, you know, 1%er and everything to impress me, like you don't have to measure up to that. Like, you know, come as you are type vibes. And y'all are upset at me, but it's like they're so wrapped up in, like you said, white supremacy and these social
And they're
constructs that
blind to it. They are
yes,
incredibly blind to it.
exactly, that they don't even see when somebody is, I mean, I'm not like doing them a favor, but like but I'm like not holding you to this standard that is hurting you and you're upset at me. You're upset
So,
because you won't be in control, because I won't let you own me, because you won't control me. Is that what the problem is?
so Sydney, we've been on for almost like 2 hours, right? And I know that
Mm-hmm.
I have taken up the majority of sort of like the space in the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But it took us, you and me,
Mm-hmm.
2 hours to go through
Chris Brown. So,
pavement
mm-hmm.
to get to this 1997 Wesley Snipes interview.
Yeah.
We're not even into like the current era, right?
No.
And so that are forget. I think this may be a two-parter. I
I
don't know how
agree.
many times you're gonna have to break up like this part of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to all right, y'all. So we will be this is part one
Mm-hmm.
of our gender wars discussion on the Safe Space podcast. Um, tune in for part two.
Exactly.